Hey everyone, welcome back to the NerdNest. Today I've got some surprising news for you. Valve just made a very unexpected move when they acquired Hapu Games, an indie studio known for their roguelike action games. But I'm also going to dive into the shockingly short life of Sony's multiplayer shooter Concord and how Microsoft is fighting back against Valve, trying to make their operating system just a little more controller friendly. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, OBSBOT. This is the OBSBOT Meet 2. It is the smallest 4K webcam that I have ever seen in my life. Here it is compared to just the lens of my usual camera. Tiny, right? It supports 4K at 30 frames per second, or you can go 1080p and get up to 60 frames per second. When I opened up the package and took this out, I have to admit that I was skeptical that it would produce a good picture, but I'm here to tell you it absolutely does. That's thanks to its half-inch sensor and f1.8 aperture. If you're not into cameras, a low aperture number like 1.8 is really good for low light settings. In fact, right now I only have one light on in this entire room, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that light off, and you can see how the camera adjusts to the low light settings. We'll go ahead and turn it back on. My old webcam had absolutely terrible autofocus, but the autofocus on the Meet 2 is unbelievably lightning quick. Let's look at how fast it snaps on and sees that sticker like right away. It's instantaneous. Really impressive autofocus. It has two built-in mics with noise reduction and gain control, but I prefer to use a dedicated microphone in order to give me the best video and audio quality that I can possibly hit. But this is a pretty plug-and-play device. It does auto exposure, auto focus, auto white balance. It always looks super crisp and the colors are perfect. It also has something called auto framing. I'm using my standing desk right now, which means I can move around a little bit and the camera is going to follow me and make sure that I'm always in the center of the frame, which is really handy, especially when you're at a standing desk like this. You can also use the OBSBOT Center software in order to automatically blur your background, but you don't have to have that software installed or turned on at all in order to use the camera. It is 100% plug and play. It has the ability to be mounted on a tripod thanks to its traditional 1/4-inch thread on the base, but it also comes with a little magnetic base that goes on top of your monitor. It looks great and is super easy to use. And speaking of magnets, it also comes with this little magnetic privacy cover that allows you to go ahead and hide from your camera. So if you are looking to pick up a webcam for content creation or video calls, I don't think you can go wrong with the Meet 2. It's absolutely fantastic, and I want to have a huge thank you to OBSBOT for sponsoring this video. I have to say, I did not expect this. Valve just acquired Hapu Games, and if you don't know who they are, they're an indie studio known for creating roguelike titles. Hapu Games has made a name for itself in the indie scene with titles that blend roguelike elements with action-packed gameplay. Their most notable works include Risk of Rain, which came out in 2013, Risk of Rain 2, which came out in 2019, and Deadbolt, which came out in 2016. I absolutely loved Risk of Rain 2. I also own Risk of Rain 1, but I haven't really played it all that much. Prior to joining Valve, Hapu Games made headlines by selling off the Risk of Rain rights to Gearbox Publishing. This move allowed Gearbox to take over future development and publishing of the Risk of Rain franchise, while Hapu Games could move on to new projects like their codenamed Snail. Players of Risk of Rain 2 aren't really happy with the direction that the game is currently taking under Gearbox, but overall I found the game to be really fun. If you haven't played it, here's what the basics are. You pick a class depending on what combat style that you actually want. You are then transported to a randomly generated alien world, and then you have to kill monsters in order to get new gear and currency. Then you use that currency to unlock new items and abilities, all while searching for the exit to the next level. Here's the rub. The longer that you're in a level, the more intense the combat gets. So it's in your best interest to move quickly. You want to find everything, but then you want to exit as fast as you can. Every time I've played Risk of Rain 2, I have had an absolutely fantastic time, but I also haven't played it in a year or two, so perhaps it isn't doing well right now. Or maybe I didn't play it long enough to get to the bad parts. I can't tell you how much time I spent on it because I played the game on Stadia. Stadia's gone now. But I played it enough and I enjoyed it enough that I ended up buying it on Steam after Stadia shut down because I wanted to continue to play it. And My son also has it, so sometimes we like to play together. One of the projects Hapu Games was working on before the Valve acquisition was a game codenamed Snail. As of the latest information available, the development of the status of Snail seems uncertain. It's unclear whether or not the project is going to continue under Valve's ownership or if it's been put on hold or completely canceled in light of the acquisition. Hapu's official tweet says this: "We're incredibly grateful to Valve for their partnerships in the last decade, and we are excited to continue working on their awesome titles. However, this does mean that we are stopping production on our unannounced game, Snail." But I don't think that this is the end for Snail, because they also said this: "It's been an exciting and transformative 12 years. We feel lucky for the opportunities we've had, and we deeply appreciate both our team and fans that have supported us and our games. We love making games and will continue to do so for years to come. We're excited to be working side by side with the talented people at Valve, but for now, sleep tight, Hapu Games." It seems like it's possible that this could continue under Valve, or that they could just wait until they're not working for Valve anymore. The phrasing to me feels like it leaves the door open for Snail, and that it might depend on if Valve acquired the IP along with the people. Valve has famously said in the past that they don't acquire studios, they prefer to hire talent at that studio. So the rights to Snail could still be up in the air right now. Maybe Valve doesn't own it. Maybe the rights are still with the people who are now working at Valve, and maybe they can make some kind of deal down the road. This comes after a string of big acquisitions in the past few years that have turned out to have disastrous results for the people who got bought. I'm looking at Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard and firing a bunch of people, PlayStation Studios acquiring Bungie and firing a bunch of people. But Valve doesn't have the same track record of buying lots of studios, so I'm far less skeptical about this. Plus, I'm a fan of Valve. They have a tendency to do the right thing most of the time. I don't think it's because they're inherently good. I don't trust corporations as a whole. But I think that for the most part, Valve tends to understand that if you do the right thing because you see a short-term loss is fine, as long as there's a high possibility for long-term gains down the road, then do the right thing. With this acquisition, Valve gains a talented team with a track record of creating really cool roguelike games, and Hapu Games gets benefits from increased resources, hopefully. Valve has been careful with its acquisitions in the past, with notable examples being in 2018, they picked up Campo Santo, the creators of Firewatch, which is one of my all-time favorite narrative games. I honestly, when I started writing this script, I didn't know that Valve owned them. And then they also picked up Starfield Studios in 2012. Valve keeps their cards pretty close to their vest, so when it comes to game development, we may never actually find out if Hapu Games and their team is breaking apart to work on a bunch of different projects at Valve, or if they're picking them up to work on one specific thing. Is Valve picking up the Hapu devs to work on Deadlock? I don't think so. That's a very different kind of game than their pedigree suggests they would work on. Same goes for rumors surrounding Half-Life 3. Those rumors have a strong indication that the development for Half-Life 3 is pretty far along, so it doesn't make a lot of sense for Hapu devs to get, picked up to work on that. Plus, that's not a roguelike. Perhaps Valve is working on something totally new, something that lines up with the development chops that the folks at Hapu Games particularly have. The acquisition of Hapu Games could signal Valve's interest in expanding their repertoire in the roguelike or action genre. Maybe we'll get a new roguelike from Valve. Whatever it turns out to be, I feel like with this and with Deadlock and with Half-Life 3 rumors, Valve seems to be bringing the focus of Valve back to video games, where they haven't really put that much emphasis in a really long time. Despite the years of effort put into its development and the big promises that PlayStation could bring a quality narrative focus to the live service genre, Concord's journey was cut surprisingly short. On August 30th, just 15 days after the game launch, Sony made the shocking announcement that they would be shutting down Concord. Here's what they said: We have decided to take the game offline beginning September 6, 2024, and explore options, including those that will better reach our players while we determine the best path ahead. Concord sales will cease immediately, and we will begin to offer full refund to all gamers who have purchased the game for PS5 and PC. Honestly, I can't believe how little chance Sony or PlayStation gave Concord to find its feet. Yeah, it's true that the game was not very popular, with an all-time concurrent peak on Steam of just 697 people, which is abysmal. I'm sure that a larger number than that were probably playing on PlayStation, as the game would have more marketing happening there. But if you look at another multiplayer-focused PlayStation game on Steam, like say Helldivers 2, it had a peak concurrent of 458,000 people 7 months ago. And as I record this, there are 18,000 people playing that right now. That means that Concord fell hard on its face. Hell, even Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, another massive live service failure, had a peak concurrent of 13,000 on Steam. Concord was a project that had been in development for 8 damn years. The game was Sony's attempt to enter the competitive multiplayer shooter market, aiming to rival titles like Overwatch 2 and Valorant. But the development of these games takes a long time. And I have to be honest, 8 years is a long time even for most games. The devs working on Concord famously said they were strapped in and ready to push it for years to come. But it looks like they didn't check with gamers because the gamers didn't care, and they didn't check with PlayStation because PlayStation wasn't having it. Hero shooters feel like a dime a dozen right now, and most of them are free. You buy costumes or some other nonsense, but you play the game for free. Live service games usually work this way because they depend on the player base, a healthy player base, to survive. If at any time I'm logging in to play and I can't find a game because nobody else is playing and I'm stuck with a bunch of bots, I'm going to have a bad time. By making the game free, you get rid of that initial barrier to entry and you give people an excuse to try it. And then if they enjoy the game, they start spending money on the cosmetics or the battle pass. It's weird because, you know, this is a game that didn't have a battle pass, but it did have cosmetics. So I'm sure that they were planning on microtransactions of some, or they were using microtransactions of some kind, but maybe not enough to make the game work. Sony promoted the game as a fresh take on the hero shooter genre, promising innovative gameplay mechanics and stunning visuals, and a big focus on narrative story. The game was released on August 15th. Initial reception was mixed, with some players praising the game's graphics. It was a really pretty game. They liked the character designs, and others criticized the similarities to existing titles, like some characters just felt like ripoffs of Overwatch characters. I did keep seeing people calling it Guardians of the Galaxy at home based on the trailer. Their big reveal trailer seemed kind of cool if it were a single player game focused on story, but this is a multiplayer live service shooter, and most people don't play those games for the story. Most players are just looking for a place where they can go shoot some dudes while not having to engage their brain too much. That's one of the things I love about Overwatch. Good shooting mechanics, and I can kind of just play it on autopilot while I listen to a podcast or listen to my book. PlayStation has said that they're going to refund players as they shut down the servers. It seems like they might bring them back up in the future, but after pouring 8 years of dev time into this game, how much more time do you sink into it before you realize it's just not going to work? I saw a lot of people whose opinions I trust saying that the game wasn't bad, it was just kind of okay. And I think that people can deal with kind of okay for free, but not when you have to pay for it, at least when you have plenty of other options. Plus, I could never shake the feeling that this game would eventually go free to play. I saw that happen with a million MMOs. The next one would come out, they would say it's the next WoW killer, people would buy it, and then they would get to endgame, and then they would miss their friends, and they would go back to WoW over and over and over. And those games almost all ended up going free to play eventually, which if you bought the game always ends up feeling bad. You know, you just kind of feel like I could have just waited and played the game for free. And usually what they would do is they would say, you have, you know, this much currency to buy microtransactions in the game that you already paid for. as a thank you for being one of the early adopters of our game. That might be something that Concord would do. In fact, I anticipated that Concord would do this eventually, which is one of the reasons that I didn't pick it up, because I do love hero shooters. But to shut down the servers after only 15 days is bananas to me. What I figure that they're doing is they're trying to figure out the best way to transition this free-to-play game into a pay-to-play game. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. This pay-to-play game into a free-to-play game, which makes me genuinely curious if they ever planned on leaning heavily enough on the microtransactions to make enough money to support the game. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Right now, there's only about 100 people playing on Steam and probably a few hundred more on PlayStation. And at some point, somebody is going to be streaming the last moments of the game with everyone on their map, jumping around, waiting for the server to shut down, and possibly never to turn back on. 8 years of work died in just 15 days. That's pathetic. Microsoft continues to take baby steps in making its operating system more controller friendly, and the latest beta of Windows 11 does just that, as reported by Tom Warren over at The Verge. Here's what he said. Windows 11 is getting a new gamepad keyboard that lets you type with an Xbox controller. It's now in beta testing, and it looks like it could be a really good addition for Windows handhelds. Now for me, every single time I've used a Windows device for anything, I've always needed to use a keyboard. Yes, they have touchscreen keyboards, which will help in a pinch. But if you're doing anything other than just a few words, it is a huge pain in the ass to use. If you combine that with the fact that docking these devices to a TV is great right up until you need to enter any text or interact with pop-up windows, it just makes not being at a desk kind of a nightmare. Well, Microsoft is finally updating Windows so you can have a more controller-friendly UI, and here's what they said over at The Verge. The gamepad keyboard is now in testing as part of the beta channel on Windows 11 and even includes a button accelerator so you can use the X button for backspace, the Y button for spacebar, and the menu button on the Xbox controller to hit enter when you're done typing. These keyboard keys have also been vertically aligned so it's easier to type with a controller, which is awesome. This actually makes it a better keyboard or a better default keyboard than the one that I use on my ROG Ally with Bazzite, as those keys are not vertically aligned, which makes typing with a controller really confusing. I'm never really sure where the selector is going to go when I use the D-pad to move it. It's a frustrating thing, but it's not a big deal, and I'm glad that Microsoft is fixing it, and I hope to see more things that they can change down the road. But this isn't the first time that they've done that. But even if this is a good change overall, it doesn't mean I'm going to be ditching Bazzite on my ROG Ally X or installing Windows on my Steam Deck, because when you're using Windows, you still can't log into Windows without touching the screen at some point. And as of this beta, when you tap on text fields, it doesn't bring up the new keyboard, it brings up the old one still. That said, I do think that this is a move in the right direction, and Microsoft has been speeding up the pace at which they make Windows more usable on a controller, or more controller friendly. They recently made Windows Game Bar more controller friendly. They made slight tweaks to the UI of the Xbox app, which does make it easier to navigate with a controller. But what I would love for them to do is just steal the perfectly capable UI that they've already built on Xbox, and when you have a controller attached, have a pop-up that says, do you want to use the controller UI? With an option to say, yes, I want to use the controller UI every single time, or yes, I'll do it right now, or not this time, or no, never. Because I think most people's biggest gripe with using Windows on a handheld or docked to a TV is how oftentimes Windows pop up that need to be dealt with. If I can just dismiss these pop-ups with a B button, or at least navigate them and select things with the controller, I'd be much more likely to use Windows, especially since all games are compatible with it. I wouldn't have to worry about using Proton or compatibility. But until that happens, I'm going to continue to use Bazzite and SteamOS as my primary gaming operating systems, because they have the least amount of friction, once you have them installed, that is. But one thing that doesn't have any friction at all is watching this video right here. YouTube seems to think you're going to love it, and you don't even have to click play. You just have to wait and hang out with me for just a little bit longer. I also want to give a huge thank you to OBSBOT for sponsoring this video. If you're looking for a super easy plug-and-play experience for a webcam, check out the links in the description down below. And thank you for watching, and Stay rad. Bye-bye, everybody.